welcome back. We look forward continuing the chapter Dalid, or rather, better yet, the epistle, the fourth epistle of Igeres HaKodesh. We mentioned quite a few times the difference of this segment that we're learning presently, as opposed to this what we learned previously, the first three segments of Tanya. There, it's a segment which every chapter is directly connected to the previous chapter. For example, the first segment has 53 chapters. At the end of the day, of course, the different subjects you find throughout the Tanya, but at the end of the day, one chapter is in sequence of the previous, and so on and so forth. And of course, Sharich Lemuno, Igeres HaTshuva. However, Igeres HaKodesh, as it sounds, it's Igeres HaKodesh. It's letters, holy epistles of the Alter Rebbe, each one different times, different circumstances which the Alter Rebbe addressed. And in this case, this is Dalit. You could say there are many times that there are certain cross-references of the Alter Rebbe from one Igeres to another, like I wrote then, like I wrote last year, and again, intertwining the message they wrote in a different Igeres to the present epistle he's writing, but it's clear that each one is a separate letter on its own. There's no direct connection of the previous. They're written in different times as well. Sometimes we mentioned even last week, and sometimes this which was presented later was written before, and so on and so forth. We mentioned this last week. So we're holding at the so it's pretty much the center of the page of Kuf Hey in the original text, wherever you're following this, primarily in the corresponding English text. And if you're following it wherever you're following, we do mention time and again, of course, for newcomers, that there is an advantage to see the class, to watch the class on the original website, which is tanyaonline.com. Besides the fact that the present class, it's easy to follow. There's a separate scroll bar on the center of the screen, right under the class. It's just simply easier to follow the actual class. But namely, you have all the previous classes from the very beginning, L'Kuti Amarim, for that matter, set up on the left side of the site. And again, there's always cross-references throughout the entire Sefer Tanya, from Igeres HaKodesh to L'Kuti Amarim to Shaykh Lemuno to Igeres HaTshuva. If you are following the class, you take note. We pretty much very frequently quote other places, which enhances and enriches the present information. So the previous class, we're beginning like it says. What is he trying to bring a proof to? You got to watch the previous class. It's the first class on Pedig Dalet. It's really a click away. It's not fair, as we say many times, to spend the time of the present class to review the previous, because it's really a click away. However, just to really very briefly to recap, the Alter Rebbe speaks about the two expressions of love which is expressed in the heart of the Jew. One, chitzei nisalev, both coming from the heart, but it's the externality of the heart. And don't make no mistake, it's not just an external expression. It's very deep, very profound. However, it's a step away from being the inherent and innate love that Yid has for HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which is, of course, so much deeper. It's part and parcel of the Yid. The Yid, just like a child, is a byproduct of the parent, has the essence of the parent in the child. So to a Yid has a chelik of a kamimal, a part of HaKadosh Baruch Hu within him. That's the makeup of a Yid. And as such, the love of a Yid as HaKadosh Baruch Hu is inherent, is innate, and of course that's much deeper than a love which is produced via a organized meditation, which in other words, based on the intellectual appreciation of the matters of God and godliness, the oneness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. We mentioned, I believe, last week, that the Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. I think we did mention in the past a few times. What does it mean about Haftas Hashem, love HaKadosh Baruch Hu? How could you command on love? If I love, I don't need if I love without having a command to love. If I'm loving somebody or driven to something, I don't need a command for it. This is what I am driven to. This is the person I'm driven to. If I'm not, what is a command going to help? You can't command on love, or I love or I don't. Command on asiya, do it. You're not in the mood, do it anyways. But love is a heart expression, and you can't command on that, of course. But what the pasuk is saying, Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, hero is ponder, meditate on the reality of Hashem Echad, the oneness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, deeply. Consequently, you will establish a love of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Because like anything else, like in any other area, any other subject in life, intellect produces emotions. You think about something thoroughly and you appreciate deeply how it can contribute to your benefit and to your well-being, so you're driven to it. If you feel that thought process is something which leads you to appreciate the matter that this is something which would cause fear, or let's say of another party, not so much fear but reverence, so that arouses a feeling, a sensation of reverence. Because, as the Lashal Rebbe writes in Peri Gimel, Likuti Amor in Peri Gimel, the first segment, click away, that the midas are Telis Chabad. And it just makes sense against not only the area of God, godliness, Torah, mitzvahs, this is the way it is. So the Alter Rebbe calls this Chitzenius because it's a production. It's something which was established, my pondering, my meditating on matters of godliness, that produces a love to God. And it's a true love, not as this expression either, Agimachta Abo. Agimachta is something just a formal type of totally external expression, Hashem, I love you, or Minas Safa V'Lchutz, which is literally meaning from the tongue or the language or the talk and outwards, Hashem, I love you. No, we're talking about a sensation of love, for that matter, a very passionate sensation of love. A Torah would call it Avas Hashem. But because it's a byproduct of my understanding, something that I built in my mind, I constructed it, I invest in my intellectual faculties to appreciate the reality and dynamics of Hashem Echad, the oneness of Hakadosh Baruch Hu, and as such, it led to a love to Hakadosh Baruch Hu. It's a true fervor, truly a fervorous, passionate love, but nonetheless, it's a production of my pondering on the reality of Hakadosh Baruch Hu. And therefore, it's a chitzei nisalev, would be called in chitzei, the externality, the external of the heart, because in comparison, vis-a-vis, in comparison, the pnimi nisalev, which is the inherent love Yid has to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the innate love as Yid has to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, as we spoke about this last week. The l'mayla minadas v'atfuna biharya, the knowledge and understanding and comprehension that man could comprehend, and the man could ponder in his heart in the greatness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, much deeper than that. Because it's innate and inherent. Again, click away last week. Let's continue. Last week's class, that is, let's continue. It says, Mima makim krasich Hashem. Hashem, I call you from the depth. From the depth of my heart. What is that supposed to mean? I'm calling you Hashem. Ayid is calling you HaKadosh Baruch Hu, because you know HaKadosh Baruch Hu exists. And if I especially going to have trouble in this material, physical, spiritual, my Avedis Hashem, I call HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Yid calls HaKadosh Baruch Hu. What does mean mamakim from the depth of my heart? What's that supposed to mean? So the pasuk is saying, yeah, you're a Yid. You have within you. You are part, in essence, as a Yid. You have a neshama, a godly soul, which is part and parcel of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So you have an innate, an inherent love to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. B'ni b'chei Yisrael Hashem. A Yid is a son, as a Yid is a part of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and therefore he has an innate and inherent love of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So beyond the structure of my comprehension and my appreciation of the reality of God, which of course produces a certain drive, a love to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, there's something much deeper, says the pasuk, mimamakim, of who I am as a Yid, from the depth of my heart, I call HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And of course, that's a different realm of calling, a different realm of connecting. Today we give an example from Mili de Alma, worldly matters. We find this many times of worldly matters, but the Rebbe is going to say over here that in the end of the day, the worldly matters, it's because you're who you are as a living human being. When it's threatened, there's something which runs so deep beyond any rationale, beyond any explanation. And of course, because that's your etzem chayusa, your calling, because this is your life. But Alter Rebbe would take it from there. The life of the Yid is, of course, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, because he is the real, what makes the Yid, or the Yid of the Yid, that makes the Yid of the Yid is his godly soul, which is part and parcel of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's Chayuse, that's why Hashem is called Chayenu, Erech Yomenu. This is who we are as Yidden. So our calling, Mimka Liba, is again much deeper than anything we could construct in our mind with our intellectual faculties. So Alter Rebbe brings this proof that maybe Milad Alma, we see it in worldly matters, the Lupamim sometimes. Yesh Inyan Gadol Ma'id, something very great. And again, we mentioned many times, Alter Rebbe, it's Ma'id, a double Lashon. We spoke about this many times. something very great and very deep, very grave. Shekol chayis adam toli by. Many times the entire life of the human being is dependent on that. And again, therefore, it touches the person. Ad nikudas pnimis alev, to the core of the inwardness of his heart. And ad bechlal, not ad nikudas. It includes the entire pnimis of the lev. In other words, you could say ad, from here till here. Here till here, but what about this area itself? Is it included? Not included. No, it's about ad bichlal. It's included as well. Without never writes it negeya ad nukud till the core of the inwardness of his heart. No, but that includes ad bichlal, the whole inwards of his heart is expressing itself in a particular way because it's something which is relevant and very deep, very grave in his life. Is dependent on that. And it causes a person to do certain things and to talk in certain ways without any structure of knowledge, without any intellectual structure. We see it sometimes. A person sometimes calls, and even sometimes it comes out in an inner scream. Even there's no composure to the expression. Because it's beyond composure, because composure comes from something which you could fit in a box. This is what makes sense, or this is the sense I made of this scenario, and I express myself subsequently or consequent to this which is established in my mind, and the sense I made of it is the way I talk, is the way I do. But there's certain areas within a person's life and an experience that there's no rationale. There's no sense over here. It's such a deep idea. So the person does certain things and talks in a certain way without any das, without any structure, without any composure. That's how we see it. The situations of urgency. What's the terminology of urgency or emergency? It's about something which is the whole life of the person is dependent in that moment, what direction it's going to go. And that runs very deep, deeper than the entire structure, intellectual structure, emotional structure, attributed to the human being. Rebbe said, just like we find in worldly matters. Worldly matters, meaning to say, in the physical, on the physical plane, meaning to say, when we say that someone's entire life is dependent on his physical life, so when you talk about the godly call or the call of the Yid, coming from a deeper place than this, which he establishes, so to say, a composed calling based on a composed, structured appreciation of the godly matters and the godly reality. Much deeper than that, in the heart, in the service of the Yid's heart, that there is mimamakim, the calling from the umkadaliba, from the depth of one's heart. Behind what's the depth of the heart of the Yid? Because he's a chayil of kami malmamash, he is part of a Kodesh Baruch Hu. So the inner calling is revealing that connection, which you don't need the whole system, if you will, of the intellectual process and procedure in order to reach that love or that calling, because the Yid is innately connected to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, inherently connected, like a child calling his father. There's nothing structured about it. It's just a natural yet very deep and profound calling. Father, especially in times which are tight, times which are constrained. In Rahman al-Islam, many times in a few seconds, things can go in either direction. Father, mother, it's a deep calling. And the calling not becomes because, I know this person, he's part of my house, and therefore in my household, that is, and provides for me, so I'm calling him and not calling anyone else. No, it's a calling of a child to a father. It runs in a different plane completely, as we can all understand and appreciate. That's how Rebbe writes, the core of the inwardness of the heart is higher than knowledge, which would manifest and invest in emotions, which would manifest and invest in emotions, which is produced from wisdom, understanding, and knowledge, or wisdom, comprehension, and knowledge. Kineda, as it's known. Where is it known? Well, so much of the Tanya is already speaking about this. So, of course, Kineda, the Alter Rebbe doesn't have to tell us where, because this is a core underlying theme throughout the entire doctrine of Chassidus, starting from the Alter Rebbe. Tanya, the very beginning, Rosh Hashanah's Bistro, the first segment, Pedig Beis, Pedig Gimel. I mean, throughout, especially for example, Pedig Gimel. So this is the Yid. The Yid is a neshama. So everything of the neshama is aligned with a godly reality because it is a chelik l'kamimal. And in there itself, there's different details for that matter. In Pedig Gimel, speaks a bit more of the composed connection of Yid to HaKadosh Baruch Hu is an intellectual investment, is hard investment based on the intellectual investment, but at the end of the day you're dealing with a chelik l'kamimal, a part of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which of course there's always that inherent and innate connection. And this is what the pasuk says: "Mima makim krasich Hashem." From the depth I call you HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Mi'um kadaliba, from the depth of one's heart. Raki b'chidas ha'or, and the Alter Rebbe continues. This is ha'or is chochmei l'yoyin shel man mabin badas. This is an array, a reflection or array of the supreme wisdom, which is higher than the comprehension and knowledge. And in there is invested and hidden the light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu mamash, which mamash, the Alter Rebbe writes, mamash, of course, this is the real palpable. In other words, this is as real as anything which is real to us can get. No one has to tell me figuratively this is a table. No, it's a real table. All this, the Eir Hashem, is really there and hidden in the Chochmah. We always translate the simple translation of the pasuk before we introduce the Alter Rebbe. Hashem b'chochma yased haaretz, which means Hashem, with your wisdom, you erected, you established the earth. The Alter Rebbe teaches Hashem b'chochma. The godly reality is in the chochma. Now, let's just finish this phrase. This is the godly spark which exists within the soul of every single yid. Now, so we did mention that the Pedig Beis and Kuti Amarim, Pedig Gimel and Kuti Amarim. But in order to understand this last few words, so on the overall we get it, but to understand it thoroughly, the difference of the connection of Chachma to Yid, as opposed to Bina and Das, you look in Likutei Amarim, Pedig Yud Ches, towards the end, or the second half of Pedig Yud Ches. For that matter, the first half would of course contribute to the appreciation, understanding of the second half, but namely, it's articulated in the second half of Pedig Yud Ches, the 18th chapter in Likutei Amarim. As the Alter Rebbe explains, that there is a bina is about expansion. Chochmah is a nekuda. We spoke about this so many times. Because Chochmah is a nekuda, it's not a nekuda of a lack of, in other words, a deficiency of the expansion. Again, we're talking about the three faculties which exist, intellectual faculties. It starts from the flash, the nekuda. Again, we spoke about this so many times. Let's try to keep it brief because you will find it everywhere, but I would suggest, again, to have this with maximum clarity. This 18th chapter in Likutei Amarim, the second half of the chapter. So Alter Rebbe writes that there is somewhat what a person understands and has expansion in his understanding and appreciation of Hashem, of God, and godliness. But then the connection of the Yid is deeper, as we said, because the Yid is a chelik l'kamimal mamash. And Chochmah, as Alter Rebbe explains, that everything, the system and process of everything we ultimately appreciate and understand and perceive, it starts with a Chochmah. You're looking at something, you're trying to figure something out. There's the initial flash. There's the acuity in the initial flash, which you don't have later in the expansion of that same thought that you're trying to figure out. Because that there is, and of course there's an advantage of the expansion because you could tell it over, or you can give it over to somebody. If someone asks you, so, what did you get? You go, just got it. So what'd you get? Can't tell it to you yet. I got to develop in my mind. So of course there's an advantage of the development. Advantage of expansion as opposed to the flash, the clarity which comes across the flash. But the reason why there's clarity, this is the main point, because it's so much closer to the nefesh, and it's about chokhmah, it's about bittul, it's not about expansion, it's just the is of the matter. The is of the matter is very potent, very powerful, to the extent you can't even explain it. It's just when you put into expansion in your faculty called bina, so again with the advantage that you're able to expand on that matter, that idea, that concept, that insight, then it becomes real to you, then it becomes tangible to you, then you can even give it over. But the depth of it, it's hard to give over because it's so powerful. And that is because that's the koyach of chokhmah. It's the truth. It's the emes. Famous. You can even see the famous ha'or of the Alter Rebbe kashashamaiti merabai say pirik lamed hey. The ha'or of the Alter Rebbe. The echad ha'emes is in chokhmah because of its bittul, because of its closeness to this which is beyond known as Seder Ishtalshel, is beyond the 10 Sviras. And in the system of the person, something closer to the core of the person. And in this case, the core of the godly reality. And therefore it says, the Alter Rebbe says, the godly reality is precise in Chochmah because of its lack of expansion, because expansion is already about me. The Nukuda, the core, the potency of the core of a matter is about the idea, not so much about myself understanding and appreciating it. And therefore, somewhat, the godly energy somewhat becomes diluted when it enters into Bina, because it's my understanding. As opposed to in Chochmah, you have the unadulterated purity of the matter, in this case, the matter of the godly matter, because you're dealing with the Chochmah of an Efshalikis of a godly soul. So the entire potency of the godly reality is in the Chochmah more than the Bina. By far, a different dynamic completely. And again, as he explains there, in the way it unfolds, a Yid's and Mesiris Nefesh, self-sacrifice, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, most of the time, or pretty much all the time, if you will, different levels, the people sacrifice themselves for HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And literally, on the stake, in front of the hundreds of people, it wasn't something that they appreciated and intellectually appreciated in godly matters and godly reality, and they took time to think about it a lot and expand the horizons of their understanding and appreciation of God and godliness. That's why they threw themselves in to the fire, literally, or they're ready to be killed, or they're thrown into the fire, that they're ready to be killed, not to renounce the oneness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. As he explains there. And again, once you have it in the end of the 18th chapter, follow with the 19th chapter, you gain much more clarity in the 19th over the 18th. As he concludes the 19th chapter, the idea of Mesiris Nefesh Yid has. It's not because of something that I understood thoroughly. To the contrary, sometimes people who understood more had less Mesiris Nefesh. Sometimes the simpleton. The Alter Rebbe writes, Nashim, women, children, not the deficiency of women and children, it's just their occupation is not necessarily in scholarly pursuit. And they give up their life to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Chana and her 7 children, it was like they were great scholars? No, the opposite. It was because I'm a Yid. You want, and I am part of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. How could part of HaKadosh Baruch Hu deny and renounce the part of HaKadosh Baruch Hu? How could that be? Can God deny himself? No, he can't. It's impossible. That core is beyond any appreciation, any understanding. And that's why you have over our history, a very difficult history, millions and millions of Yidden, give it the life of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, because of the Chochmah, because the message, the godly reality, which was part and parcel of who they were, but it came to expression via their Chochmah, the Nekuda, the Bittul, the connection to the matter, not so much the way I develop the matter, because then there is even subtly the I, which is of course the contradiction to the godly reality. Mentioned this is in the far extreme. The moment there's any strong I, the famous Gemara and Saita, full amid, all about the any I is a contradiction to the godly reality. In this case, it's chas v'shalom, not an I of my ego, my pompousness or anything similar. It's just very subtle. It's I understand. I figured it out. That's subtle. I figuring out these matters, even though you're talking about godly matters, that's somewhat a contradiction to the unadulterated reality of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. As opposed to Chochmah, there you have, it's about Hashem. And that's why he says, the godly reality is in Chochmah, which is higher than Tvuna Das, understanding, perception, expansion, and Elokus and God and the godly reality. Beyond that, it's the Chochmah, it's the Nekuda, which is the godly spark which exists with the soul of every Yid. So when that calls, a different type of calling, not commensurate at all to the Tvuna and Das, to the intellectual appreciation, and even calling is a result based on a fervorous love, passionate love, yes, but you can't compare it to the inner calling of the Yid, the way it comes from the Chochmah, the Nekuda, the core, the innate, inherent connection to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And that's the Pnimius Halev, which Alter Rebbe talks about before. So the Alter Rebbe asks a question. So this is all clear. The two levels, the Chitzenius Alev and the Pnimis Alev. So Alter Rebbe asks if this is part and parcel of the Yid, and that's who we are as a Yid. So why isn't it something which is default by every single Yid? The Yid's always calling Umka de Liba from the depth of his heart. Hence the profound, intense, constant connection and cleave to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Not so constant and not so frequent and not so much like the default reality exists, at least overtly, by every single Yid. Why so? If it's innate and inherent, it should be on a constant basis. And that's what this is the Alter Rebbe asks. Why doesn't every Yid merit this level of to serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu with a service of heart, from the depth of one's heart, from the inwardness, again, as explained earlier? And the answer that we are culpable. Why are we culpable? Because that core is in exile. That core is in captivity. Who put it in exile? Who put it in captivity? As I say, yours truly, us truly. In other words, Alter Rebbe speaks about this, the reason why it doesn't have to be so. Alter Rebbe is trying to pull us out in perspective. That once we redeem that, nig'olin, once we redeem that, it's a different type of relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, an ongoing default, different type of relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, unique type of relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's the message of the Peirim. But Alter Rebbe is again trying to encourage us to find geula, to find immediate, impersonal redemption, which of course all personal redemptions are associated with the grander scheme of redemption, which is the geula, hamitas vashlema, the collective redemption, of course. But so the Alter Rebbe says, why isn't it? Why aren't we zeicha? Why do we merit to serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu within this level of umka deliva, the depth of one heart? Is because this level is placed in exile. This level is placed in captivity. Now, when you say exile and captivity, you can appreciate it doesn't take away from the matter itself, not at all. For that matter, a royal king, which just up till moments ago led an enormous type of leadership, true leader, a great leader, a king, and with a composed royalty and regality and whatever you could think about a king. Again, phenomenon of king is not something which is prevalent today, but something we could imagine. And when someone takes that king and locks the king up in a room, as we had in the past, unfortunately, revolutions, the time they went straight for the king and they put the king in exile, or they captured the king. In that moment, the king loses royalty or regality, inward royalty. Of course, he can't express it because he's locked. That's what we're really talking about. It's there, but it can't be expressed, unfortunately. But in the example, it is a king which didn't lose any of his royalty, didn't lose any of his exaltedness, his regality. No, he's just now confined because he's placed into exile or captured. So Alter Rebbe says we took this level. The reason why it's not manifest, doesn't come to a constant expression. To serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu as default, again our default, because we are Chelik L'Kamim Al Mamish, we're part of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And therefore why shouldn't we merit to serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu on a constant basis, from the depth of our heart? Answer, because this is placed in Golus, this is placed in exile, V'shivya, and captivity. And as we know, the terminology of Golus Shechina, the Shechina is in Golus. Because of our sins, we were exiled from our land. It's not just, we're exiled geographically from this territory to another territory. It's the Shechina, because, as Alter Rebbe explains, again, you can see it in many places. Now you can see it. When go to Perikid Zayin is a little extreme, but the Holy Geras HaTshuva is built on that. The Shechina itself isn't Golus. Because a person, Golul Edem Shechini Moim, which again, always to translate the simple meaning, Golul Edem, that Yidden were exiled to Edom, one of the exiles, the Shekhinah came with them. And the Alter Rebbe says, Galula Edim, because a person, Rahman conduct himself in an Adomic manner, with of course sin. So he took the Shekhinah, which is part of his neshama, it's the level of the corresponds to the K, again, the Yud K, Vav K, the K, which is the Shekhinah, entered into very unfortunate areas based on our actions, our deeds, or misdeeds for that matter. So the Shekhinah itself is in Galul Edim, we exile, we did Adomic, we conduct ourselves in an with an Adamic conduct through sin, action, speech, or thought. The Shekhinah, unfortunately, went down to the abyss and is in Galus because it is right now captured by the unfortunate influences or empire or forces or enterprise, if you will, of Klip and Sitra Achra. Again, you can see this in Igeres HaTshuva. It deals with it much clearer in Pedic Dalet, in Pedic Hey, that is, Pedic Hey, rather, Pedic Vav, and Zayin. Yeah, throughout, pretty much till almost the end, till Yud Aleph. It's mentioned also in Pedic Yud Zayin 17. So this is in Igeres HaTshuva, the third segment. Click away. Dalet 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, you can get the entire idea, understanding, without even though 8, 9, Alter Rebbe already speaks about the redemption of that area of Galus, the Shekhinah within you being redeemed, alludes to it in the end of Perek Vav also. B'shav Hashem lekecha nak shvuscha bar es shvuscha im shvuscha. Hashem is returning with you because the Shekhinah itself goes into Galus based on our connection to Adamic actions or speech or thought. Again, ultimately sin, Rahman al-Itzlan. So the Shekhinah goes into Galus. Now, when we talk about this, what's going to the Shekhinah in Galus to this godly spark or our neshama or this Pnimis Halev in Galus? Because that's what we're mentioning time and again, not to separate between the Pnimis Halev of a Yid to the Shekhinah. This in the Pnimis Halev of the Yid. The Pnimis Halev of the Yid is about the Shekhinah, as he says over here, Boy, God knows Hashem, there it is dwells, invests, and hidden the light of a Kodesh Baruch Hu Mamash. That's the Shekhinah which exists in the Pnimis of the heart of the Yid. So when we put that Pnimis of the Lev into Golus, that is tantamount, or that is the Golus HaShekhinah Mamash. Because this is the godly spark within his godly soul. How did it get into Galus? How did it come into Galus? Who exiled this Pnimis Halev? Who exiled this godly spark of the godly soul, which is ultimately the Shekhinah? So the Alter Rebbe continues, the Sibus HaGolus, Maimer Azal, the reason for Golus, like the Chazal tell us. Our sages of blessed memory tell us, Golul Bavel Shekhinah, which again, the simple meaning is when Yidden went into Bavel, so there's the Golus of Edom. Here he quotes the same idea, which is another Maimer Azal, that when Am Yisrael goes into Bavel, into Golus Bavel, Babylonian Golus, Shekhinah Iman, the Shekhinah goes with them. So again, usually it's translated as a comforting expression from our sages of blessed memory, because what do they say? Basically, you're not alone. Regardless, when you're suffering, Hashem's not just hovering up there and from time to time gives a peek what's going on with him. All right, we'll get back to him later. What happens in the meantime? He's suffering, and somebody's suffering a lot. No. In the suffering of the Yid, individually and collectively, Galul Bubble means when Am Yisrael went into Bubble. Hashem is not hovering from on top. Shekhinah Imam, the Shekhinah is with there. When a Yid suffers, Hashem is right there together with him. And if a Yid cries, Hashem cries. And if a Yid is in pain, Hashem is in pain. Because Imeh is not only close in proximity, because if you're close in proximity, it also doesn't say or determine completely how close you are to the other party. You could be close in proximity, and you could be about face of the other party. You could look the other direction. You can get distracted from multiple distractions, even though you're very close in proximity to the other party. But Imay, Shechina Imahem means to say Hashem experiences everything that He experiences when He goes to Golus, individually and collectively. Imay Anechi B'tzara. I am together with you, which is generally, it has to always know that it's not your suffering, and Hashem is from above and somewhat even close or very much aware one way or another about your suffering. No, it's imoy. He's crying together with you. He's in pain together with you. So why doesn't he redeem himself? Why doesn't he open the door himself? Isn't he God? The answer is, unfortunately, the way Hashem established a certain system that that something has to happen, the doors have to open up, and not to go into it now. That's in Geras HaTshuva, which we just quoted. And we ask, even there, you see Pedic Yudal, a very comforting Pedic, that Hashem himself knows how to, because in the end of the day, he's God. He's able to pull open the door that we could able to come out of Gullus, the individual Gullus, spiritually, physically, emotionally, psychological Gullus. But in the context of the Geras HaTshuva, of course, the spiritual Gullus, which a Yid finds himself, which in the end of the day, a Yid, as the Rebbe mentions many times, Etzel Yisha Yisraeli, by a Yid, physical and spiritual, there's no dissonance between them, and that the physical reflects constantly the spiritual status of the Yid. It's not that it's the same. No, of course there's the priority. We are here to exercise our spiritual demand, our spiritual pursuits have an impact on the physical. That's what Torah mitzvahs is all about. There's no division. Our mitzvahs are deal with the physical world. Our learning Torah, and generally our mandate is to transform and sublimate Olam Hazeh, this very physical world, into abode for HaKadosh Baruch Hu, of course. But we're talking about the physical unfoldings of the Yid, his comforts, his parnasa, everything what comforts to contributes to the physical comfort of the Yid. By a Yid, Isha Yisraelu Yachad Yelechon, they go together in the end of the day. So spiritual emancipation also manifests in physical emancipation as well. So the Alter Rebbe says, what is the Siba of Galus? Is because Galul Bava Shchinim. So there is the Galul Bava Shchinim more of a collective manner, and then again the individual manner, which we just said, as we mentioned before, the similar terminology. Galul Edem Shchinim. We ourselves deliberately did stuff which are not appropriate for a Yid, a Yisraeli. We went to the Edomic, represented by Esav and so on, type of action, speech, and thought, Rachmana litzlan, God forbid. And so to Bavel, type of Golos types of action, the Golos types of speech, the Golos types of thought. And therefore, we brought the Shechina, which is really this Pnimis Halev, this is where the Eir Hashem, this is where the godly spark, the Nitzat Tzaliki, the godly spark, from HaKadosh Baruch Hu himself is invested in this Pnimis Halev, in the Chochmah of the Yid. So when we Rachmana Golul Bavel, when Yid connected to Bavel, Shechinimah, he brought the Shechina, he brought this godly spark, Rachmana into Golul. So we ask the question, why is it not manifest? Why don't we have that expression? Why don't we serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu on a constant basis? Kadaliva, from the depth of one heart. Yeah, when a king is sitting in that box and sitting in that prison, you will not see, or is captured, you will not be able to see any expression of his exaltedness, his regality, his being a king, his being a leader, and so you don't see anything of it. Is it there? Of course it's there. It didn't go anywhere, but it doesn't have the ability to express itself because it's in Galus, it's in exile, and so too, Hilbish, it's there, but you took that Pnimis Halev is in Galus. Put it into the Yid Rachmana put it into an exile. Forcefully put it into an exile. So how did he do that? How did he or she do that? So Alter Rebbe says, it continues and says, and the text will stop over here, which is a good ending. Umaltim, to circumcise, to remove the covering of the heart, which the Alter Rebbe is basically saying that we put into. How do we put into Galus? Because we took the core of our interests and we put it into other areas. Zelu mazel salikim, famous expression in Chavis Halvavis. One cannot love something and the antithesis of it simultaneously. And in there, of course, in Chavis Halvavis says, you love Elam Hazeh, you're not loving HaKadosh Baruch Hu. You invest in Elam Hazeh, of course, it taints or it dilutes your interest, your motivation, your passion to the godly reality. It's like a seesaw, as it's called. It can't be both of them on top. It's or one on top, one on the bottom, or the other way around. Again, the other on top and the other on the bottom. Based on the pasuk of the Chum, it's or this, and it explains the Chavis Halavis and Avedis Hashem, which the Alter Rebbe is saying something over here similar idea. Of course, not quoting again. I'm just mentioning the Chavis Halavis, but the Alter Rebbe. Not of course. I'm quoting it, just not to take it, not to put in anything of the Alter Rebbe's words, but the message is very, very similar. That's what I'm quoting. The Chavis Halavis, a famous expression of the Chavis Halavis. The Alter Rebbe says you took your core and you put it into the nonsense of Elam Haza. You did it with passion. You put your whole heart and soul into it. So what you did was you camouflaged. You put it into gullahs. You put that area, the core of your interest, into gullahs. The core of your soul into gullahs, into matters of worldly matters, not even necessarily sin. Of course, when it comes to sin, it's the real gullahs, it's the explosion of gullahs. But not even sin, it's just the overly indulgent in matters of Elam Haza. Of course, when you take the core of your soul, you put it in there, and then, oh, Hashem, I want to call you from the depth of my heart. No, you don't want to call Hashem because it's covered. You covered it with layers and layers of physical indulgence or indulgence in the physical. So you want to naturally open the siddur and you should melt away with your prayer, with the energy of your godly, the core of your godly soul, the Emek Halev. No, your Emek Halev isn't Golos. How did it end up in Golos? How did it end up in exile and captivity? Because you put it in there. What does it mean in reality? In reality, does it mean that, a Yid cannot have any connection to the physical because the physical somewhat is not necessarily calling. It's not on it naturally. Of course, we were meant to sublimate the physical. The physical should be perfectly aligned with the spiritual, but on this physical on its own. To the contrary, it says that's about me. Give me, feed me, whatever contributes to my comfort. We spoke about this many times. Al Alter Rebbe brilliantly speaks about the Yetzer Hara. He does say the Yetzer Hara also. There's a difference when you break it down. The Yetzer Hara, Nefesh Bahami is the animal, but Alter Rebbe speaks about the negative, known in Sifri Musar as the Yetzer Hara type, the evil inclination. Alter Rebbe brilliantly calls it the Nefesh Bahami, is the animal soul, because Alter Rebbe is trying to say the animal soul has the ability to be transformed, like every animal could be a wild, beastly, desert running type of uncontrolled animal, but then you could bring it in, you could bring order into the animal, domesticate the animal, and eventually it's a different type of animal. The Rebbe says the same thing. Inherently, the Nefesh Bahamis could be transformed and metamorphosed even. Now that's the objective. We have to love HaKadosh not only with our godly soul, and of course loves HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but with our animal soul, which is the theme, the thread throughout the Likutei Amorim, in general, the very beginning, the first parakim, but the negative side to the animal, which Alter Rebbe alludes to this in the very first chapter of Tanya. Later, in Perek Vav, as an example, he gets into it a little deeper, or a little more from a little more direct. What's an animal? Just to understand the Yitzhak, we have to think about evil inclinations. No, look at the life of the animal, not necessarily bad. It can get bad once it allows itself to just overly indulge and someone disturbs it, so then, it starts goring also, and it could hurt another of its, another animal, and another person. But where does it come from? I want, and whatever contributes to my comfort, that's what I'm all about. Like, don't get in the way. So, but does it mean that the person, like we mentioned before, it could be a domesticated animal as well. For that matter, without our Nefesh Bahamis, we wouldn't be able to live. We wouldn't be able to learn Torah. We wouldn't be able to do Hashem's mitzvahs, because if I'm hungry, I have to eat. And I must eat, because a person doesn't eat in halacha a certain amount of days, 3 days, and then drinking, the 7 days, 3 days, one drinking, one eating, isn't the other person expires. If it expires, he can't put on tefillin. can't eat matzah, can't learn Torah. But if I don't know I'm hungry and I don't have an interest to eat and to appreciate this food or to satisfy my hunger, so then how am I going to know that I have to eat a meal if there's nothing calling? And it could lead to total expiration. So there's no Avodas Hashem as well. So of course the Nefesh Bahamis, the animal soul, meaning to say just to minimally express its connection to worldly matters, meaning to say this which ultimately would contribute to me as an Eved Hashem, as someone who is always is able to maintain the focus that I'm here for a purpose, to serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu, to learn Torah, to do mitzvahs, to give tzedakah, to pray and to invest in prayer and so on. And I have to go eat. So you have to have food. You have to go to work. You have to make a parnasa. You have to do it right. You have to be organized. And why not an expansive parnasa? Because you want to pay to pay tuition, a full tuition, and help someone else with their tuition. It's all connecting to the world reality, but you don't lose focus. That's the idea of domesticated animals. Domesticated animals contribute to the well-being of its owners. It plows. There's order. It plows so that the owners are able to produce good produce and grain and wheat and make good bread and live in order. A good domesticated animal contributes a lot to the well-being of the owners of the animal. And so too, when there's a minimal connection to matters of ilmaz, it's one way or another, it's a good thing. As long as there's always 100% focus that this is for a higher purpose, this is for a higher goal, a higher mandate, a deeper mandate which is associated with the lukus, a godly mandate, and there's always 100% eyes on the goal, focus on the goal. So that's okay. And of course, we're not talking about that. To the contrary, one needs that. And the time this person has to go to sleep. And of course, there's a certain comfort of sleeping, but that's the way a human being functions. And Eved Hashem functions. The person, one who serves HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that's the way they function. They need to sleep in order to get up and learn Torah, daven, and so on. So that's good. That's not only okay, but that's a positive. It's very positive because all this is contributing to the service to the service which a yid, as a human being, has to execute in learning Torah, doing mitzvahs, giving tzedakah, and investing in prayer. Here we're talking about something totally different. Focusing on the physical as a means, not as a means to an end, but this is an end game. This is so much pleasure in that. And how could I just have it mediocrely? Let me get completely involved in it. And from there's an overly indulgence as an animal, when a non-domesticated animal. The calling, because its default lifestyle is with so much indulgence. Give me, I want it now. There's no time that you're going to tell me I have to eat. There's no order in the barn. It's now, I want it, and if another animal is going to disturb, I'll gore it to without any pity and so on. That overly indulgence in the physical is what Alter Rebbe is talking about here. And in order to do so, you took your core of your soul. Because where is it, the drive, that inner drive, to get involved in every area of Olam Hazeh, if it's my eating, my drinking, and anything which is over, as expression, there's a famous expression in Yiddish, bizi b'renaz, like just more and more, because it just contributes to my comfort. And there you get in the way, of course. And then there begins greed and hatred and negative attributes, because in the end of the day, why is there this evolution of negative attributes? Because someone else is getting in the way of something which I want full comfort of. All the money and all that, whatever it is. You don't have to elaborate on this. So you took your core and you invested it in that. Now you want to open a siddur, Hashem, I'm really so connected with you, and I have a primis nefesh and have a godly spark, which is part of who I am, and I would probably melt away within 3.5 seconds. They say 1 to 60 in 4 seconds. Right away, Hashem, I'm a yid, I have a chelik l'kami mal mamosh. melt away into the godly reality just as I open the siddur and start praying. No, your core of your soul is covered with so many layers and layers which you invested your core in order to indulge in the physical and the pleasures and delicacies that Elam has in each other expression, each other involvement, each other pursuit, placed another layer on your core of the nefesh. So is it there? Yes, it's there, but it's deep under the rubble of so many different layers that you yourself placed on top of that core of your soul. Galul the bubble, you're doing a lot of bubble stuff. Especially when it crosses into sin, which the border is not that stark. They just say there's no real stop sign between Sholish Klipas Neg and Sholish Klipas Atmei. This is quite vague. Back to the animal. If it's overly indulgent, something comes in its way, the gore will come right away. And goring is not just, something even in halacha. Goring is by all categories, physically, of course, categorically, it's something negative, hurting another party. There's different levels, tam, muad, and so on and so forth, in halacha. So in this case, usually when someone gets becomes overly involved in the physical, it is in his and her indulgence in the physical. So of course, it's almost inevitable that they cross over the stop sign into the prohibited as well. They can. Like the animal, again, it begins with just overly indulging, but then coming its way, it would gore, which that's categorically not just doing something which contributes to my comfort, that's hurting another animal or another party, another human being, as an example. And this so too, when a person is usually invested with heart and soul into the physical, into the indulgence in the physical, from there to even chas v'sholom cross the line of something what Hashem says is clearly prohibited, not so. The borders are quite opaque, not noticeable, and the person slips into areas which are truly areas of abyss, and every area just. But even again, Alter Rebbe doesn't even talk about this directly, because even before that, in the end of the day, it's all another layer of the core of my soul. So it's like taking the king with all his pristine regality and royalty and putting him in a box, capturing him, putting him into gullus. And that's what the person does when Rahman Aslani conducts himself in this way, and he puts the core of the neshama into gullus. So that's the reason why one is not zeicha, as Alter Rebbe begins, Masha ein adam zeicha. Why Kolein Kol Adam, not everybody is merits to serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu, because the Kudaliba is in gullus. Rebbe concludes this again. We'll go into it best from this coming week. The terminology of the pasuk itself. Hashem says, circumcise the orla, the covering over your heart. Really, isn't Mila? Don't we know Mila is one of the mitzvahs in the Torah which we do to a child 8 days old, which is not in the area of the heart? Why would Tayas emes? It's like not a Musa sefer. Like circumcise your heart. This is a pasuk in Torah. I mean, even Musa sefer at the end of the day it carries the energy of the true Musa sefer, of course, the true Bal Musar. Bal Musar, which was anchored in the Kedushas HaTorah, of course, it's connected to the Kedushas HaTorah. But here it's a pasuk in Torah. Circumcise. The Fashtopkeit literally means in Yiddish the coverings, the layers of your heart. What is the pasuk talking about? Mil is in a different area. What does it mean? Yeah, now we can understand it so perfectly. We put over so many layers, so the Nukud of the Lev, the core of the heart, is hidden under these layers, under the rubble. So Hashem says, Umalten, take it away, strip it away, all these, in order that your heart, your Yiddish hearts, your innate, inherent, fiery love to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Again, perhaps when we talk about innate, inherent, it's less fiery, it's beyond fiery. It's the core of who you are. You and HaKadosh Baruch Hu are essentially one. Your cleave, your drive, your passion to HaKadosh Baruch Hu is beyond description, because you are part of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. You have a chelik HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and you are inseparable. Reveal that. It's there. It's who you are. You put on layers of Malta Masaras Levata. Take it off, Hashem says. Strip away those layers. We all know how to do it. The way we get into the mess, that's why we uncover the mess. You put rubble over a diamond, just take the rubble away and you find the diamond. And in the example over here, it's because a person gets involved in matters of bubble. Undo that. But Al Rebbe B'ez Hashem, in the next week, the next parts of this page, we'll explain it a little more explicitly, even though the overall, we're pretty much certain we know what to do, what not to do, in order to reveal the lev, namely the pnimi salev, the mamamakim krasich Hashem.